I started filming this video last week and my battery died and I went to charge my battery and then didn't film it for like 4 days. So I'm gonna film it now, talk about it now. So today I wanted to talk about the books that I read in Q1 of this year, so January, February, and March. Again, if you haven't seen my previous videos, I've been reading my books by color. So in January I read pink books, in February I read nothing, but it was supposed to read red books, so in March I read both red and orange books and had to read 5 of each color. I have my bullet journal here with the books that I've read. Isn't that aesthetically pleasing? I love it. I don't think I'm going to talk in detail about all of the books. One, because some of these books, as soon as I read them, I was immediately like, meh, and any thought I had about them is gone. It's been too long. Two, not all books, even when I had just read them, had thoughts about them. I might not have had any thought that was even remotely smart or important. It might have literally just been, it's a book. In January, I read 8 books. 2 of those books were 5 stars, 3 of those books were 4 stars, 2 of those books were 3 stars, and 1 of those books was 2 stars. Starting from the top and moving down. The first book I read this year was the Jane Austen Book Club. It was okay. Light, fluffy popcorn book. I read it in I think like 1, maybe 1.5 sittings. It's 3 stars. I enjoyed the way that the characters within the book club's plots seemed to align in some way or another with the plots of the Jane Austen books that they were reading and talking about. I do enjoy a good comparative narrative. But again, it was 3 stars. It was fine. If you're thinking of picking up, go for it. You might enjoy it. It's not mind-blowing by any capacity, but it was a good, enjoyable read nonetheless. The second book I read was Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Susan. I gave it 2 stars, mostly because what I wanted out of it, it was not. So the copy of the book that I have raved it as, you know, it's a feminist book from the last century. It's a queer rights book from the last century. It is not. It just isn't. And there's nothing wrong with the writing or the story, but what I was looking for in it, it did not have, and I became continually more frustrated at it the more that I was reading it. The thing that frustrated me the most was it's a queer manifesto from the 20th century. There is a character, one of the main characters, who has a female-female relationship, but the way that those 2 characters interact with each other basically was, we're not lesbians because, unlike other lesbians that are trying to be men, we're just 2 friends that are having some fun. And I'm like, what is a real lesbian? And then there is a completely other character that catches her husband having relations with another man and basically treats being gay as a disease, which is how it would have been treated at the time period, that he was sick, that there was something wrong with him, when later in the book another character basically insinuates that that character's children might be gay. She becomes the most upset that any person could ever be, as if the worst insult that anybody could ever insult you with, your children are going to be gay, was there, and it just made me mad. So continually throughout the book there were things that were being said that I was like, I don't agree, I disagree, I disagree, I disagree, I am upset. It is not a happy book. I don't think it's supposed to be. It talks about how fame and success and getting the things that you want, or the things that you think that you want, are never going to be enough. Yeah, so I understand why it's sort of such a cult classic in a lot of ways. It wasn't what I wanted out of it, and that's not necessarily the book's fault, but 2 stars. Next I read Sweet Bitter. I gave that one 4 stars. I enjoyed it. It was okay. I really enjoyed all of the descriptions of food. I enjoyed the fact that the characters were around my own age group. I find that I am increasingly more and more sort of upset / judgmental about books that take place with teenagers, because I am not that. And it's not a time period I want to go back to in my life. So when I'm reading these books, I'm like, I just don't want to be reading this. It was nice to be reading about people who are sort of out on their own for the first time, struggling, doing things like that. Yes, a little bit of things that weren't exactly how I think I would do them, but it was a good book. So 4 stars from me. Again, if you want to pick it up, I'd recommend it. Not a bad book. I then went to a YA book, There's Someone Inside Your House by Stephanie Perkins. I gave it 3 stars. I have read 2 of the 3 YA romance books that Stephanie Perkins has written and enjoyed them. I don't think that they are high literature, but they aren't trying to be high literature, and that's fine. They are just YA squishy romances. This felt like a YA squishy romance smushed onto a thriller, which is a valid type of thriller. I feel like there are a lot of, one of the elements of thrillers that I've read usually does have a romance element. It was very romance heavy, I will say that. And I will agree with a lot of the reviews when they say that they never felt like the characters were really in any danger. I would argue that the last, 50 pages or whatever it is, there was a good sense of danger towards the characters. One of the not main characters, but secondary characters does die, which is rare. It was okay. For a YA reader who maybe hasn't read a lot of thrillers or is kind of not a horror or thriller leaning person, I would maybe pick that up for them if they want to try it. It's a good sort of transition into the genre, so that might be someone who might want to pick that up. So There's Someone Inside Your House by Stephanie Perkins. The next book I read was my first 5-star of the year, and that was The Grace Year by Kim Legit, and I loved it. So putting it up there with like Handmaid's Tale, putting it up there as like a really good book to give to a young person to discuss positive and negatives in relationships, critical thinking towards societal norms, and generational stories. I enjoyed the way that the female characters who were initially pitted against each other, didn't end up in that same space. Like, they bonded as a group, and while the society that they're in does sort of push them to categorize themselves and to compare themselves to each other, they reach out and do their best to support each other instead. That's always something that I'm looking for in books about women, is how they treat each other. And the way this book handled that was very well. This is one that I think that everybody should read, whether you're feminist or not. Or whether you're a young girl or not. Like, it's just very well written. I enjoyed it. It was well done. Highly recommend. The next book on this list that I read was Gingerbread by Helen Oyeyemi. I gave it 4 stars. This is a weird fucking book, and I loved it. I tend to gravitate towards weird pseudo magical realism / surrealist literature a lot, and this definitely fits into that category of book. I would say that it's not for everybody, and there are parts of the story that didn't quite go the way that I would have written them, but again, it wasn't a book that I wrote, so yeah, 4 stars. It wasn't perfect and flawless, and I loved it, but I loved it nonetheless. Next, I read Severance by Ling Ma, which is one of multiple books about diseases that causes the end of the world that I read this year. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed that the zombie aspect of the narrative was not so much your traditional, oh god, they're spooky, scary zombies. The zombies in this case aren't harmful to other people in any capacity. They are humans who caught this disease and get stuck in a loop. And the humans who aren't sick, whether it's that they are immune or that they, for whatever reason, are able to keep going as a human in this environment, tend to put the zombies down. I really enjoyed what the zombie was meant to equate to in our world, because like most dystopian apocalyptic stories, it's meant to criticize something that's going on currently. If you're okay with reading a book that has to do with the end of the world and the world ending because of disease right now, definitely one that I would recommend. I understand why a lot of people really enjoy it. Definitely one of the books that I think sticks with me so far from the year. It may end up being one of my top 10 books of the year, even though it didn't get 5 stars. It was a 4-star read for me, mostly just because of the predictability of the narrative. Yeah, but one that I would recommend to almost anybody. Good book. The last pink book that I read was the first book in the Mistborn trilogy, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, and I for sure feel like as soon as I finished it, I wanted to keep reading it, but I finished it the second day in February, and I was like, I can't keep going with this. Also, I'm reading books by color, so I would need to wait until the next book is the next color for the next book. After reading the first one, I bought all of the books with the UK covers with the like light blue swirling thing. So in June, I think June is light blue, I will hopefully be smashing that series out. But yeah, I loved it. It was 5 stars for me. I understand why a lot of folks really enjoy the series. It felt like the world was very well established. I wasn't getting too much info dumps all the time on world building. It was just enough. There was enough action. There was enough romance. I enjoyed where it was headed. I also think I can understand where the story is going from here, and I hope that it can maintain that amount of interest in me. I struggle a lot with series, and that the first ones are very strong, mostly because I enjoy learning about the world, and seeing a character go from nothing to something. And then after that, once they are already something, it kind of stagnates for me. So we'll see how I feel about the rest of it. But yes, if you like fantasy and interesting world buildings, the metal burning magic is obviously an interesting and unique take on magic systems. It's well written. I think it would be a great book to hand to a young person as well. It feels like it would be great for a YA reader, although it's generally an adult fantasy book. So if you have both boys and girls, even though the protagonist is a girl, I think that I would hand it to boys as well, and be like, hey, this is a good book about a strong girl. Yeah, so if you have a young person who likes fantasy and is looking for something, this might be one to point them towards. Again, I was supposed to be reading Red books in February. I started 3 books and did not finish any of them until March, so just keep that in mind. In total, I read 5 Red books because I set the limit that I have to read at least 5. I read them in March, but there we are. So I put down Poesía de Amor by Pablo Neruda as my first Red book. I did a stream where I translated a couple of the poems, but I read them all in Spanish. I super glad that I did that. I think I've read 1 or 2 Pablo Neruda poems at some point in the past when I was learning Spanish. He definitely writes simpler Spanish poems. Like, it's not going to be very long, confusing language, but well worth a look in any capacity. I gave it 4 stars. I enjoy Neruda's poems. They're, in a way, mildly sexually charged and also definitely male-oriented romance, where it's like, this is my woman, and even if she's not the prettiest woman out there, she's still my woman, and I love her, and I'm like, she doesn't need to be the prettiest woman, but okay. The next book I read was Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I gave this one 5 stars as well. It was another very strong, I would set this one as sci-fi. Takes place on Mars. When humans have moved to Mars, they've terraformed it. There's a caste system. The Reds, which one of the protagonists comes from, are mostly living underground. They think that they're still mining in order to make Mars habitable for humans. Little do they know that humans have been living on the surface and thriving for a long time, and now those Reds that are harvesting resources to make things habitable are actually harvesting resources that they are moving to other planets farther away to make them habitable for humans. And this is a story about a Red who tries to become a Gold. It has the trappings, I feel, where I don't know if I'm going to continue liking where it's going. I liked the protagonist. I liked the way the story went. I liked aspects of the story where he realizes he's not the only Red to have infiltrated the Golds, and sort of how that's represented in the story. I liked the Roman gods, the use of Roman gods in the way that their Gold Academy is set up. It was one that I also immediately wanted to keep reading, and I have the second book behind me somewhere, which I will be reading this month to continue talking about. So yes, Red Rising. I then read Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. Gretchen and I read Vicious together last year. I think we have a video on that. I don't know if it's up yet or if it's one of the ones that I still need to edit. I'm working on it, guys. It's on my desktop computer, and my desk chair is currently downstairs with my stepdad, so he can work from home. And I have an ottoman, but it's not comfortable to sit at long periods of time, so editing would not be super comfortable for me at the moment. But we're working on it. I'm getting there. I'm trying to make content regardless, so that might not be up yet. It might already be up. I'm not sure. But I read the second book, Vengeful. I gave it 3 stars. I liked Vicious more, I think, because the core aspects of Vicious being Victor and Eli's relationship, and I felt like this second book was lacking in that. They were still both there, but it wasn't focused on them. It wasn't really focused on anybody, and losing that heart to the book meant it lost a little bit. It was a little bit lackluster. I still enjoyed the world and the concept and the story for the most part. I just wasn't as invested in it as I was with Vicious. So if she comes out with another book in the series, I will read it. This book may just have had second book syndrome, I don't know, but it was still okay. I do recommend Vicious as a good read. Not a perfect book, but a good read. It was entertaining for both me and for Gretchen, I believe. So yeah, I read Vengeful, 3 stars. It was okay. The next book I read was Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. I gave it 4 stars. I had initially started reading this in February. I was listening to it as an audiobook on my way to work, and it kept making me so anxious that I could not, I had to stop it because I would go into work anxious, which is a good thing. That meant that the writing was doing what it was supposed to be doing. It's an extremely interesting thought experiment if you take on the idea of every choice you make creating a branch in reality. It went somewhere that I super wasn't expecting it to. I should have, but I didn't expect where it went. And I enjoyed how it ended, although it felt a little bit meh. It was it's okay. I enjoyed it though. It was a good book. It was 4 stars for me. So if it's one that you were thinking of picking it up, it's definitely one that I would recommend. It's an interesting science fiction premise, light sci-fi, not hardcore sci-fi, as it's just one particular sci-fi element is introduced. And yeah, so it might be interesting for anybody who has that constant what if in the back of their mind, what if I had done this? What if this was the wrong trajectory of my life? It's an interesting way to look at what is the right or wrong trajectory, and should you had gone back to change it, would you actually miss your life more? The last Red book I read was Red Sister by Marc Lowrance. I gave it 4 stars. It's another one that I think that I will continue with the series, but of the higher genre fiction books that I read, it was the least interesting to me. I definitely would put Mistborn and Red Rising ahead of it. Interesting world, interesting premise. There were bits of it that seemed to take place in the far future and bits of it that were taking place in quote-unquote the present timeline of that world. It definitely aligns more with a traditional high fantasy sort of setting and ideas, and that's fine. There wasn't anything wrong with it. It was quick-paced enough for the length that it was. Yeah, it was okay. I enjoyed it. There were some tropey elements that I kind of foresaw how they were going. And, yeah, if I feel like it, I might pick up the second book later this year when I'm doing Grey books, because I believe the second one's called Grey Sister. We'll see how that goes. In March, I read 11 books, 5 of them red, 6 of them orange. I had 3 5-star books, 3 4-star books, and the rest were 3 stars. So 5 3-star books. The first orange book I read, I listened to on audio. It was Ayoade on Top by Richard Ayoade. I gave it 3 stars. Very funny, very good. It was short and enjoyable, but it wasn't anything like life-changing. If you like Richard Ayoade's humor, I would highly recommend it. It is very funny, and I also would recommend the audiobook, even if he, within the audiobook, constantly comments on how you're missing certain jokes because of the audiobook. You're missing the physical on-the-page jokes that would be there. I think it's a book and I might order the paperback version of to have because I liked it enough for that. It would probably be like 3.5 stars if we're talking about it, but yeah, it was okay. He breaks down scene by scene view from the top of the film, the terrible, terrible film, and makes jokes and interweaves it with stories from his own past and dissections of what On Top is. Then I read Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. At this point, the pandemic was in full swing and my store closed its doors to the public, but we were still going in to do online orders. So I was listening to audiobooks at work while I was working, so I had like 6-hour stretches where I was just listening to audiobooks. So a lot of these books I read in like one sitting, start to finish, while I was doing work. Turtles All the Way Down was 3 stars for me. Of the John Green books I've read, which I think I have read all but one, I think this was my least favorite. It was an interesting thought experiment, but not a great book. Not a lot happened. If you have young people who are struggling to comprehend mental illness in any capacity, picking up this might be a good idea for them, just to see what it's like to have a different perspective, what some people may think like. Yeah, but it was 3 stars. It was 3 stars for me. It's an interesting book. I can see why it would be good to give to young people, but it isn't necessarily something that I would hand to somebody as like, you have to read this, or you really should read this. The next book was the next 5-star read that I read. It was The Fireman by Joe Hill, and the second book, that's a post-apocalyptic story based on disease. So The Fireman, it's technically a fungal disease that infects humans. It's the type of fungus that sort of co-ops the host and uses the host to propagate itself. The good thing about this book is that it is not based on survival after the end of the world. The disease is everywhere. The main character gets the disease in the first couple of chapters, and from that point on, the disease isn't really the thing that you're scared about. It's more humans and how they react to disaster. It's definitely not something that I enjoy seeing as a human who lives in America in the current climate, but I loved it. It was still great. Joe Hill is an amazing author. He's definitely one of my all-time favorites, and this is sort of, I don't know if I like this one more than I liked Nosferatu. Nosferatu aligns more with my own personal taste in reading, but it's definitely 5 stars for me, and all of his books have been up there as great. He's a master of writing gray morality into characters, so characters who think they're helping but are antagonists, characters who think that they are antagonists when really they are good people. So, you know, the human experience where you're trying to look out for you or look out for the people you love, but you might be somebody's mortal enemy. It's just really interesting to read stories like that. Again, I understand if people don't want to pick this up in the current climate. I get it. I loved it, but I also understand why some people wouldn't at this point in time. If you're one of those people, don't read it right now. Maybe read it in 2 years when everything's figured out. I still would recommend to read it, though. That was followed by On the Road by Jack Kerouac. I gave it 3 stars. It was okay. Very macho man, what it's like to be a young man in the 20th century. It's weird to read that book because Kerouac invokes a sense of nostalgia for a period of time that I never experienced and I don't think will ever exist again. There is no way that you can hitchhike your way across America with $17 in your pocket. It just cannot happen in the modern world. And reading a story that sort of holds this up as the pinnacle of Americanism, what it means to be an American, that you are free to literally get up and go anywhere. I don't think that that's true anymore. And I feel like most millennials would stand by that. They would be like, you can't. It's not. You can't. You just can't. But I understand why. It's a modern classic. It's well written. It is able to evoke those emotions even in somebody that's incredibly jaded and doesn't really believe in what it's trying to say. You still get why that is. I didn't love any of the characters or the story itself, but that emotive and evocative writing is something that I can definitely stand by. It's something that I can see why people would really like it. If you love road trip books, it might be a good one for you. Definitely a high literature road trip book for you. But yeah, 3 stars. It was okay. It was alright. My next 5-star book is Middlegame by Shannon Mcguire, and Shannon Mcguire is another author writing right now that I highly recommend anybody read anything she's written. I haven't made my way through her canon, as I found her, like many people did, with Every Heart a Doorway. Middlegame feels like it's what all of the little experiments with the Wayward Children series was meant to help her figure out. It's like the longer version of that, where you're looking at the way that fairy tale stories or literature being used as allegory for the real world can overlap with a realistic story. Again, it is a science fiction story. It's a story where alchemists exist and alchemy works. You're able to create humans. They're able to trap, they're able to take natural forces and give them human bodies. This is the force of chaos. This is the force of order. The secrets to those being hidden within children's stories, where The Wizard of Oz is one way of thinking about alchemy, and an entirely different series that doesn't really exist is another way of thinking about alchemy. But in true Shannon Mcguire fashion, the children's series that doesn't really exist, she has then gone and written and is hopefully going to be published in the fall. That's one that I'm going to look at to see, in tandem, if I compare the 2 books, if I can sort of see the train of thought of these alchemists and how they get to where they're going. If you're the type of person who loves middle grade literature and loves dissecting it like I am, this is definitely one to pick up for that reason. I also always love Shannon Mcguire's writing because it represents different sexualities, it represents different disabilities, and is able to incorporate them in a way that isn't preachy. It's just representation for those communities, something that I think we need more of today. So definitely go support her if you can. Middlegame was a masterpiece in my experience and something that everybody should read, but I understand if you're not a high fantasy, not that it's high fantasy, or if you're not a fantasy / sci-fi person, I can understand why it wouldn't appeal to you. Or if you're not like me and you really like looking at parallels and picking away at, you know, what books are trying to tell us, I can also understand why it might not be your jam. But one of my favorite books of the year so far, but also possibly one of my favorite books of all time. And then just finished up a couple of days ago, I finished up A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. 3 stars for me. Again, it's another book I understand why it's a modern classic, but meh. I would say if you said, hey Michaela, what is some 20th century dystopian literature that you would recommend? You're gonna be going, what, like 1984, Brave New World, Lord of the Flies, this guy. All of them are valid, and I think all of them are interchangeable to a point. I think of them, 1984 was the strongest for me, which I read back in high school. A lot of people read this book in high school as well. I read one of the anniversary editions, and it had a foreword from the author where this isn't his favorite book, but it's the one that he's probably going to get remembered for. I'm interested to read some of his other books. He definitely plays with language in a way that I super love, where he makes up words or makes up his own slang or takes current slang and sort of pushes it a little bit farther to create a world that is weird and different from us, but completely understandable in the same light. So that's an interesting thing about this that I really enjoyed as just like a literature buff. Yeah, highly recommend that if you enjoy looking at ways of breaking English. But not one that I'm like, this is gonna be one of my favorite books of all time in general. I understand again why a lot of people read it and love it, and why it shakes a lot of people, because it is quite aggressive in a lot of aspects. And it is sort of saying something about current modern society, but I don't necessarily know if it's the like book to hand to people about 20th century political criticism. And those are the books that I read for January through March, aka the pink through the orange books. I'm currently reading my yellow books and working on that. If you are interested, I can also show you my Popsugar reading challenge. There's a good number of challenges that have been checked off already. I believe I am at 19 books out of my 75 goal, so I'm on track. I might be like 1 book behind, but I'm on track so far to hit that this year, which is great, especially because I'm coming up on the number of books that I read last year, and we're only in the 4th month of the year. So I'm definitely doing better than I did last year. I have more time now, but I'm reading less than when I was working. Mostly because I can do whatever I want, and I'm like, oh, I can play video games. It's been so long since I played a video game. Oh, I can, you know, spend 4 hours decorating in The Sims. Just make a house beautiful. Just fucking doing that. That's great. Love that. I can obviously do that while listening to audiobooks, but I don't necessarily have all of the audiobooks to things. So, pros and cons. I can listen to audiobooks of some stuff and keep working on it. So, how are you guys doing? Have you read any of those? Is there any green, light blue, dark blue, purple, black, gray, or white books that you can recommend to me, as those are the rest of the colors that I will be reading this year? I hope everybody is having an okay time. They're staying home and staying safe. I'm gonna keep making content. I'm gonna try and get up those couple of videos that I hadn't edited. Might only be 1. I think it's only 1 video, whatever it is, that we didn't get up. I might try and get that guy up as well. Yeah. enjoy all of the content. A lot of people are working really hard. Hope you guys are doing good, and I will talk to you again next time.